I used to submit my talks to every single software conference I could find, only to get rejection after rejection. Nobody seemed interested. That is until I analyzed hundreds of abstracts to figure out the 5 key ingredients and turned it into an easy-to-follow system. Today, not only do my talks get accepted to top conferences like NDC and VR developers, but my system also helps other engineers get theirs accepted. It's the exact system I will reveal in this video, and if you stick around until the end, I also share the one big mistake you need to avoid. And don't worry about taking notes. You can download the summary by following the link in the description. Let's dive into the first step, which is the foundation for everything else. If you get this one wrong, the whole abstract can fall apart. Let's start with 3 titles as an example. Why does every company have legacy code? Legacy code matters. How to convince the business of a big refactor or rewrite. Which one piqued your interest? The third one, right? Even though these are 3 titles for the exact same talk, it would never get accepted with the first 2. Let's look at 3 more. The Zaga pattern. Microservices result in a fragile system. Resilient microservices against all odds. I actually tried to get my talk accepted with all 3 of these titles, and only the second one ever got accepted. So why is that? Well, it all comes down to intrigue. When I initially decided to give a talk about the Zaga pattern, it was because it solved a big problem for me. But my audience had no idea what it was. Obviously, people who already know the pattern don't need to learn about it. So I had to refocus on the actual problem they had, a fragile system that literally keeps them up at night. Microservices result in a fragile system also had another advantage. It was provocative. Everyone was knee-deep in the microservices hype, and people starting to get disillusioned were intrigued by this contrarian title. So instead of focusing on the solution, the first step is to find an extraordinary claim. What's one belief about software engineering you thought was gospel? Until an experience changed your mind. Let me know in the comments. You might also help someone who has the same problem right now and needs that insight. Because in the end, that's what good talks come down to. Challenging your audience's beliefs so they can walk away that much wiser. So step 1 is find the extraordinary claim, because people most likely to benefit from your talk are the ones intrigued by it. Okay, now that you know which belief you want to challenge, we are ready to write our abstract. It will have 4 parts, each just a sentence or 2, but each is crucial for getting your talk accepted. However, the first sentence is the most important, because that is how far most people read. That's where you need to spark intrigue with your extraordinary claim. This is usually going to be your title, but you might expand on it in the first sentence of your abstract. So how do you do that effectively? Let me give you an example from one of my clients. She came up with this title: Prototypes Don't Need Tests. Does that sound interesting? Honestly, my first thought was, this is kind of obvious. Why would I go to a talk like that? Turns out her talk was about practical advice on how to notice when writing tests doesn't deliver the value it should. So we changed her title to Stop Writing Tests. That sounds provocative. But all we did was remove the nuance that her talk explored in detail. Removing nuance from a title works best for talks that challenge hype cycles. If you challenge a hype cycle without nuance, it will always sound completely nuts. There's the same logic behind titles like TDD is Dead and Agile is Dead. In general, Axis Dead talks are based on this concept, but they don't work as well anymore because they have become a tired trope and aren't specific enough in what they challenge. So please don't submit a talk titled AI is Dead to the next conference. Please. But what if you don't have a hype cycle to challenge? Then just ask, what if? What if testing legacy code was easy? What if estimates are useless? What if looking at metrics results in bad decisions? It's a powerful technique because all you have to do is take a false belief you had and ask, what if it wasn't true? Alright, you've got their attention. Just enough for them to read the rest of the abstract. For them to come to your talk, you need to convince them that you are worth listening to. And that comes down to 3 factors. Think about it. What are you personally looking for in a talk? There are likely 3 things that go through your mind. Is this talk solving a problem I have? Why should I listen to this person? And what am I going to hear about? But answering these 3 questions effectively isn't as straightforward as you might think. Take, for instance, the problem you are trying to solve. If I were to tell you that microservices architecture introduces operational complexity, that's true, but managing complexity is part of the job. So let's try this instead. Soon after introducing microservices, we were overwhelmed by constant outages and endless alerts, leaving us no time to figure out what was going wrong. See the difference? I said the same thing, but this time it's about how it impacted me personally. No one wakes up thinking they have operational complexity. They wake up to a pager duty alert and likely wish they chose another career. Let's take another example. I run a group for aspiring tech speakers where I help them improve their abstracts and their talks. One of my clients wanted to do a talk on code reviews. His first attempt at defining a problem was code reviews can create unnecessary bottlenecks. Again, that is true, but is that something that keeps anyone up at night? Not really. So let's reframe this. Have you ever waited for a PR review only to walk up to your peer's desk to nudge them? It feels like asking for a favor when it really shouldn't. What makes it worse is that instead of useful feedback, you feel lucky to get and looks good to me instead of a bunch of pointless nitpicking. I don't know about you, but when I read that, I start nodding in approval. Yes, I know that problem all too well. It's not just a problem anymore, it's the problem I personally know and hate. So in step 3, you need to show the problem in an emotionally relatable way. As you can see, we can learn a lot from analyzing abstracts. And I'm planning on doing a follow-up video on this topic where I review a couple of real examples. If you want your abstract to be one I give advice on in that video, just leave it in a comment below and it might get selected. One of the mistakes my clients make fairly often is describing the problem in the third person or use a passive voice. For example, most people get terrible code out of AI agents instead of I used to get terrible code out of AI agents. This is a giant mistake. You might think that admitting you struggled with something undermines your message, but quite the opposite. And that leads us to step 4 of the system, building credibility. So let me tell you how I started my journey as a tech speaker. I was first speaking at local meetups. Most of my talks were about things I just read in a book. Indeed, I would basically just tell the story of me learning about a concept and then using it for the first time. Most people love those talks because they made the concept tangible. But then I decided I wanted to raise my profile and speak at proper international conferences. Whatever. And that's when I made a crucial mistake. I started claiming I was an expert. Instead of meeting my audience where they were, I started to frame my talks as best practices. Instead of explaining why I did things the way I did, I expected people to believe me just because I was on stage. And that completely destroyed my credibility. Instead of being a helpful peer, I came off as obnoxious and arrogant. So now, instead of saying, I fixed microservices communication issues at several companies, I say, when I started out, I struggled. But after multiple failed ideas and countless sleepless nights, I figured out how to avoid those 2 a.m. alerts. The big secret to building credibility is that you don't need to be an expert. And you definitely shouldn't act like one, even if you are. The only thing you need to be an expert on is your own journey. And you need to be ready to show the struggle you went through. The best way to build credibility is to tell your own personal story. This leads us to the last step, which is easy to get wrong, but also easy to fix. So let me ask you a question. Would you rather go to a talk that promises you will be a more effective coder, or one that tells you that you won't need to spend time debugging code you wrote several months ago? It's the second one, right? Even though the two are almost the same. The reason is quite straightforward. The second one is way more tangible. That is why fixing this is so simple. Just take the problem you already phrased in step 3 and write down its exact opposite. If your problem is spending weekends debugging production outages, your payoff becomes finally sleeping through the night knowing your system won't wake you up. Once I started using this system, I got my talks accepted to conferences like NDC Oslo and KraftCon Budapest. However, there is still one big mistake you need to avoid. The key to this system is identifying the problems you run into early so you can document the process of solving that problem. I did just that when I was trying to simplify coding other microservices. I got so excited about Thrift that I submitted my abstract before I got enough experience with it. Big mistake. By the time I gave the talk, I kind of hated Thrift. It ended up being one of my worst presentations. So the mistake you need to avoid is committing too early before you see the whole picture. Having said that, if you want to use the system that got me on stage 10 times this year, grab the summary by following the link below and subscribe to the channel for more tips on building your engineering career. See you next time.